Keep your third eye open. I said, what's it?
And we're recording. Welcome to the Unpick podcast, episode 7. My name is Kay, and I'm joined as always by my co host S. We're recording on the 21st of April 2021, and it's the day after the verdict of the Derek Chauvin case. Did you manage to catch it live to see the verdict?
No, but I had my alert set up.
Right.
So the Guardian, the LBC, Twitter, your grandmother, everyone informed me about what happened and the verdict. And I think he was guilty on all three charges. I didn't understand what the three different charges meant. I know they mean very specific things,
Yeah.
but the good news is he's guilty, and it's a good thing that he was guilty, of course, because
Yeah.
we all saw with our eyes what
Yeah.
happened. I The main question in my mind was, are people going to use this either as an excuse to justify everything that happens consequently to that? Because a lot of people looked at the BLM protests across the world and maybe looked at it as only a George Floyd issue as
hmm
opposed to an issue against systems and institutions that are racist. And I hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation about the justice system in America, in the UK, across the
Yeah.
world, and policing, and what police can and can't do, and why they're allowed to do certain things, and how they police communities, and how they go about doing that. So, but it was good. It was a massive relief to me. I wasn't sure because I thought three charges, two out of three, one out of three.
Mm.
We'll take that. At least me, anyway.
I agree. I was looking at the how people responded to it, and
Hmm.
especially people who, I guess it's worse if they generally looked at that video and saw nothing wrong, or they think he should be innocent. So I think the people who are just trying to sow division and just trying to be contrarians for the sake of it.
Hmm.
But I just had this thought, which is to anyone listening who thought that he shouldn't have been found guilty. The thing that worries me on a personal level is what you're saying is if you turn the corner and you saw a police officer with his knee on my neck, you would think that's okay and you would walk away. Or if you asked, why is that happening? And someone told you it's because I'd been accused of something. I'd been
Hmm.
accused of trying to palm off a fake £20 note. Oh, okay, that's cool. And walk away.
Yeah.
That's the thing that, and slightly kind of, you and I watch Line of Duty, which is a show about police corruption. The BBC has been
Religiously.
the BBC have been doing a kind of documentary series about police corruption back in the 70s, 60s, 50s.
Hmm.
Some of the attitudes then were the police could never lie, the police could never be untrue, always trust the police. When they used to fit black people for crimes, those black people and working class people, no one believed them because they're like, the police would never.
Hmm.
So my worry is that are there people who just have this uncritical view of authority of the police? Positive, good news, not good news, but I think a relief. Yeah, like you, I just was like, I could breathe a bit easier.
It's sad that relief is the first emotion that we had, and I saw a lot of people, at least on Twitter anyway, saying that it was because a lot of people had followed it from the beginning, watched the
Yeah,
court, watched the live recordings of the show. I said the show because it really was a spectacle, wasn't it,
yeah,
of the court case, and had followed it right from the beginning. I didn't do that because we know since George Floyd's death last May, so many other people have been killed. Was it on the eve of the verdict? So another young person was killed. I personally couldn't do that, and I was just waiting for the verdict. And I was prepared for no guilty. I was prepared for all guilty. I was prepared for a mixed match, 2-1 or whatever. And I was happy that the verdict was all guilty on all three charges.
mm,
And I just hope that his family and his community can rest a little bit easier. And the good thing though is that the federal government, the Justice Department, have launched a sort of I think is it statewide, or at least I know in Minneapolis, wide inquiry into policing, and hopefully that report will yield positive results. Hopefully that brings the community together. Hopefully that makes the police better. Hopefully that allows policing hopefully that is a beacon of what good policing looks like after the reports come out, and maybe the good things of that report are taken into account. So it's a moment of some hope, at least if you're from that community. I can understand. Um, so yeah, we take what we
Yeah,
can get.
yeah, and maybe it's a sign of a justice system that's maybe coming to life. It almost feels like it's been dormant for years
Hmm.
if you're African American, but it's coming back to life. And I thought it was good that it was broadcast, because normally when these things happen, everyone says, "Well, you didn't see the evidence, you went to the court case, you weren't there,
Hmm.
you don't know." We all got a chance to, in as much as you wanted to hear all the evidence,
Yeah.
anyone can go listen to it, listen to both sides. I didn't watch the whole trial, but I watched the summary of the defense and the prosecution cases, and that was interesting. So so that wasn't what we were going to talk about this week, but it
Yeah,
happened
we had to,
yesterday.
and we had to mention it. Yeah.
Yeah, we just had to say our piece on it. We're going to slightly pivot, but I think it's kind of in the same space, and maybe hopefully that becomes clear
It's
throughout
all
the.
under the umbrella. If there's an umbrella out there, it's all under the same umbrella.
Lil Nas X is rapper, artist, musician, model, filmmaker, director.
He's a
Um,
polymath.
out of Texas.
Is he from? Oh, yeah, of course he's from
Yeah, he's from
Texas.
Texas,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Uh huh.
And he came to prominence when he did the song "Old Town Road" a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
It's called the Streisand effect, right? Where if you try to block something, it becomes more popular. When I think they tried to deny him a spot on the country charts,
Oh, yes. The notoriously.
and then he ended up doing a remix with Billy Ray Cyrus, who's Miley Cyrus's dad.
And he's a legit star in his own right. Like
Oh,
his he.
Billy Ray.
I really liked him on Hannah Montana show. I'm not embarrassed to admit I did watch a couple of seasons of that show.
No, it was an elite show.
It was. If you know, you know.
2-3 weeks ago, he put out. I think his album's coming out, and he put out a song called "Call Me by Your Name." Now, if you've not heard it, pause this. I know it'll be difficult to kind of tear yourself away from our voices, but pause here, go listen to it, and then
No,
come
watch
back.
it. No, it's not just listen. You have to watch the YouTube video of Lil Nas X. Call me by my
Y-
name. Call me by
Call
your
me,
name.
yeah, yeah.
Call me by your name, Montero, because Montero is his actual name.
Tell us why that was a moment.
Okay, I'm. How do I put this? So watched the video. Maybe I was having a very slow day, but I
Yeah,
just really enjoyed the song,
yeah,
and it I didn't get the religious iconography
yeah,
until it was explained to me,
yeah,
and even then so the video starts with a little speech, blah blah blah, whatever, and it's the Garden of Eden,
yeah,
and also in this video every character is played by Lil Nas X, and it's
yeah,
meant to be Lil Nas X land, so the Neverland, but his face is on everything. And so he's the snake. He is Eve. Is being tempted by the snake. He then runs away to try and, I suppose, resist
yeah,
the devil.
yeah.
Somehow ends up with the devil, and then it did change scene to very what's that movie with Jennifer Lawrence in it, the dystopian one,
Hunger Games,
very Hunger Games, very Greek
like a
fighting
Colosseum
arena.
type.
Exactly. And everyone's played by him, and he is coming out, and he's then condemned to die. And it's also very Jesus as well, right? Because it's very Jesus at the when Pilate, is it Pilate? Pontius Pilate,
Yes,
when Pontius Pilate condemned him to death and washed his hands off that, and the baying crowd saying, we'll have his blood on us and our children, our children's children.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
so he then gets condemned to death. He dies. His soul ascends to heaven with an angel, which is also him,
yeah.
beckoning his soul forward. And he's going to heaven, and then bam, what happens? You take this over. This was my best bit, but this is my favorite part of the
Yeah,
video.
so he's just been convicted or tried and
Hmm.
convicted.
Justice.
He's ascending to heaven,
Hmm.
and then from nowhere, a stripper pole like
But we
shoots.
don't initially know that it's a
We
stripper pole.
don't
So it's
know,
this thing
right?
that shoots out from the ground up, and then he grabs onto it.
And then I don't know what the verb is. Stripper poles down. Stripper.
he
He pole dances down.
he
Pole
descends and
slides.
pulled he
He
okay.
pole slides all the way down.
He does. Uh-huh.
towards now hell.
So bypasses heaven all the way straight down to hell.
Yeah.
Then it's very Dante's Inferno, going all the way down, and he finds himself in hell, and he's then walking through hell, I suppose. And then he opens this gate opens, and he sees the devil, which I was it played by him, but if it wasn't, it was this
It
person's
wasn't him. I
face.
think that was the only character that wasn't him.
That was okay. Okay, that
I
makes
think
sense.
so.
And
It didn't look
no, it
like
has to
anything.
be because that's a crazy CGI. Then he walks up to the devil and essentially seduces the devil. So
Yeah.
this is the scene that got everyone's Christian grandmother praying over time. He dances and seduces the devil, twerks on the devil, grounds on the devil, all of that on the devil. And then he gets behind the devil and then breaks his neck,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then basically snaps his neck
Yeah.
and then takes his crown and wears it, and then his wings come out. And
Yeah.
so I guess this is showing that he's accepted everything that comes with himself. And so
Yeah.
this was quite a symbolic video. Lil Nas X is wearing heels. He has got a red wig on, pigtails. He has also his nails are done, and it's quite
And
clear. Go on.
no, and we should say that Lil Nas came out as gay last year or the year before. So maybe the only mainstream rap chart
Mhm.
topping black rapper who's come out as gay.
Yeah, and also he's 22, so that speaks of the younger generation. So this is not like actual big Nas coming out. It's actually just the little ones. All the rappers that have little and baby in their name of that ilk. He is the only one
Yeah.
who is gay, but also successful. Because
Yeah.
I think we must say that his success kind of came first, and then came out as gay, and also the way he came out was very like, I'm gay, so what? Move on.
Yeah.
And the success continued.
There was the kind of predictable conservative backlash against the video, the usual kind
Yeah.
of religious backlash. But we're going to talk about something slightly different. So, yes, there was a portion of the internet that was talking about the religious iconography. And also, he put out some shoes that were called the Satan shoes, etc. What was really interesting was a portion of Black Twitter's response.
The Dr. Umar Johnsons and
And so let's dial it back a bit. Last year, Lil Nas X did an ode to Nicki Minaj where he dressed as Nicki Minaj for her iconic cover. You know what I'm talking
Mhm.
about?
is which
In the
iconic
pink, in the pink kind of vinyl tracksuit.
Oh yeah, when he did the pink, bright
Yeah,
pink. Okay,
right,
get up.
right.
Yeah.
And so what we saw at the end of last couple of weeks was almost a combination of what started last year when he did this photo shoot, which is a particular segment of the black community came out against him. And I think what you and I found interesting was the particular criticism they were laying at his feet. So forget the religious stuff. He was being blamed for, or he was being seen as a symptom of the emasculation of black men, which is for the last 20, 30 years has been a popular trope about how America is trying to destroy the black family. And I thought that was interesting.
It is, and I think it even goes probably further back because a lot of this also it's not just emasculation of black men; it's the active feminization of the black
Right,
man,
right.
which implies that femininity is very exclusive to women, and in men it's weakness,
Yeah,
right? Um, so a lot of these sort of tropes started with buck breaking, which I didn't even know, which was when during the period of slavery, when slaves were sold to their plantations, they were essentially raped to break their spirit, hence buck breaking. And
right,
buck obviously is the word used for male animals, which were used to then
right.
breed and kind of grow, animal on farms. And so this is referring to obviously black men as bucks and having to break their spirit, kind of like with stallions and horses.
Yeah,
You have to break the animal spirit for it to then become docile. So that's where that started. And there's a segment of the black community, and this is black community across the world, by the way, includes
yeah,
Africans, Caribbean people, etc., who, and this is often massive, this is religiously tinged, I would say,
yeah,
would actually be an understatement because it's directly linked to religion
yeah,
and the sort of anti-homosexuality, very particular about what a man looks like, what a woman looks like, what a man's role is, what a woman's role is, what the black family should look like:
yeah,
man, woman, children, man as being the head of the household, the woman being the carer, the home, the homemaker,
Mm.
etc. So every time you see any black celebrity play any role that is remotely seen as feminine, overtly or not. So we're talking about Medea, Tyler Perry, who his character
Yeah.
dresses as a woman,
Yeah.
Martin Lawrence in Big Mama's House. They've got the same critique. Even I think last weekend on SNL, Kid Cudi wore a
Yeah.
dress,
Yeah.
and the same critique was lobbied against him. Why
Young
are
Thug
you
wore a dress on his Fire album. Phew.
iconic? That album was really good. Listen, that I'm a Young Thug stan. That was a really good, that album where he wore that. I think it was like a light purpley dress straight off the catwalk. Um, and the same critique is always lobbied against black men when they wear clothes which are deemed to be for women,
Yeah.
or engage in behaviors that are deemed to be for women. So we love watching reaction videos. So we exchanged a few reaction videos, and a lot of it was about his nails, his makeup, the fact that he's twerking, the fact that he's dancing on the pole, the fact he's wearing heels, the fact that he's showing, he was obviously scantily clad, because often you never see scantily clad men; it's always scantily clad women.
Yeah.
Um, and so once again, there's this idea of what a standard black family looks like is enduring throughout our communities across the world,
Yeah.
for good and for bad.
We talked about this in the vaccine episode. There are genuine reasons behind whatever anxieties our community faces. And you just touched on it. There are historic reasons for this anxiety about emasculation of black men,
Hmm.
or whether it's the destruction of the black family.
Hmm.
What happens really cleverly is the pivot on who's to blame. So you end up that people are blaming Young Thug and Lil Nas X, and not the kind of prison industrial complex system, or the fact that, and this is why this is kind of like the slight nod to what we were talking about, that
Hmm.
when a black man is shot, that destroys that family. When a black man is arrested at a higher disproportionate rate than anybody else, that destroys the family. When they're denied jobs, when they face discrimination in the education system, that destroys the family. But
Hmm.
people here want to sit and talk about some 22-year-old kid wearing a dress. That's what's destroying the black family. And the thought I had was, there's also a slight subtle difference between when Tyler Perry plays
Medea.
Medea, Eddie Murphy played Big Mama's House, or Martin Lawrence.
Hmm.
The same people who criticize Lil Nas X probably would tell you they love those shows, because it seems like the object of ridicule in those shows are black women.
Absolutely.
Lil Nas X isn't attacking black women in this show. He's
No.
asserting his own identity,
And it's very clear from the beginning of the video. Yeah.
and that hits people slightly differently. But
Yeah.
when Tyler Perry wants to mock black women, or when Eddie Murphy has this grotesque caricature of black women,
And it's not a caricature to make a greater point about the treatment of black women, or to lampoon how we see black women. Kind of like drag, for example, right? Drag is hyperfeminization, often used to ridicule the notion of hyperfeminization. And that can be done quite cleverly as well. But in these examples, it's purely to just say black women are loud, black women are rude, uneducated, over emotional, prone to mania almost, because these characters are absolutely ridiculous. And
yeah,
yes, they're funny if you like that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with liking that sort of humor. There's nothing wrong with enjoying those films. But you have to understand, for the people, and you made a really good point, for the people who don't like black men doing non-black men things, you have a problem here. There's a hole in how you see the world here.
yeah,
If you don't want Lil Nas X to wear heels and to wear dress and to wear makeup and to wear wigs, you have to say the same for Medea. You have to say the same for Martin Lawrence. You have to say the same for all these movies. And when you don't, your biases and prejudices are glaring for everyone to see. And
yeah,
that's a problem.
yeah. Let's just, so clarification, you're right. Martin Lawrence played Shanae and Mama Payne, and he also did Big Mama's House one, whatever, one and two.
Yes, Norbit. Yeah. Hmm.
And then Tyler Perry perennially plays black women. Isn't that his brand?
Ugh, listen, okay, a quick recommendation: go watch the Boondocks episode by Tyler Perry
Yeah.
and leave it there. Hmm.
Um, Before we kind of move on to our main topic, I think there's a link here also about homophobia, right? A lot of these are,
Absolutely.
and we need to ask ourselves what the roots of homophobia in the Black community are. I think it's interesting that when you look at, say, for example, the and anti-LGBT laws across Africa, for example, they tend to be colonial era laws,
Yeah.
a historic legacy of essentially kind of colonial rules, right? People try to tell us that this is not an African thing, it's not a Black thing, but I don't think there's any evidence to that effect. What you have are just colonial era laws that never left the books, and then they're used by dictators and autocratic regimes to suppress
People.
people. Yeah, which kind of takes us nicely to our next topic, which is the long-awaited Sewell Report. Um, how did we even get to the report in the first place? So we've had tons of reports in the last few years, right? We've had the Lamy
Mhm.
report, we've had
Yeah.
all the way back to the Macpherson report.
Mhm.
The Lamy report took 18 months. I think it was well received, well researched. We've had 6 or 7 reports in the last 20 years. Why do we need another report on racisms and racial disparities and all of that?
How not to do racism.
The idiot's guide to not being racist.
So last year, as everyone knows, George Floyd was killed, and
Yeah,
that caused an absolute conflagration across the entire world,
yeah,
including the UK. We know in the midst of lockdown, or just towards the end of the first lockdown, people took to the streets. People from across the country, black people, white people, brown people, everyone took to the streets to protest not just George Floyd, but also police brutality right here in the UK. And let it not be mistaken, we do have police brutality, we do have racism in the UK. That
yeah,
is not something that's kind of gone away. Boris came out and said he was going to launch a inquiry following the BLM protest to examine our issues at home. And he acknowledged that there was an issue. But what he said was he wanted to change the narrative and he wanted to stop the sense of victimization and
yeah,
discrimination. Now, if it's not clear to anyone listening right now, that idea of a sense of victimization and discrimination as opposed to actual victimization and discrimination
yeah,
caused
yeah.
loads of columns were written, loads of people argued about this, that already you're starting on the back foot
Right.
if you're that person who's saying there is existing racism in the UK. And the Prime Minister says, well, actually I want to change the narrative. So already he's kind of told us what he wants to do.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then we have all his commissioners who he appoints, and maybe we'll touch on them a bit later. Tony Sewell himself has a history of saying all manner of things that are
mm,
completely unacceptable. And his commissioners are people who, in their whatever they do for work, if they've written columns, reports, have clearly stated that racism exists, but not quite. Mm, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So this is who
yeah,
so these are the people we're starting with who are going to write this report into racism. And so unsurprisingly, the report comes out and it what does it do? It essentially says that the UK is doing a lot better than it did 50 years ago. Well, that is
yeah,
true. But also that it's sort of the most progressive white majority country and actually we're a beacon of light. You guys should be grateful because we've done what are you complaining about? You should be grateful because in terms of jobs for people under 30, the disparity between black and non-white, I'm sorry, non-white and white counterparts is almost zero.
yeah,
There's some racisms, but it's not institutional. And actually, that society in 2021 and 2020, we've begun to essentially widen what racism means to a point where it's gotten mad. Essentially, is what he said to us. So, for example, the report made a point to say to speak on the idea of sensitivities on microaggressions, and essentially you're stretching the meaning of racism so thin, and there's no data to support that. Essentially, all he said was that perceived racism is bigger than actual racism. The key point, that the take home message from all these little things here and there, was that it's racism is not institutional, racism is not systematic. Racism, yes, yes, there are some issues here and there in terms of NHS, in terms of health disparities, which we talked about in the vaccine episode about
yeah,
why
yeah,
during COVID Black and brown and other ethnic minority communities happen to suffer and die from COVID much higher than the white, white communities. This report said that yes, all of that's true, guys, but systematic racism and institutional racism are not really a thing. And of course, as you can imagine, there was a lot of backlash to those conclusions.
Let me just read out a paragraph, and then, and this is in the forward to the report,
Mhm.
and I'm quoting here. Put simply, we no longer see a Britain where the system is deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. I'm just going to pause there. So I always find it interesting that there's always an acknowledgement of racism after the fact. Like, oh yeah, in the 60s we were racist. But go back to the 60s, no one is claiming there's racism. They're like, oh yeah, in the 20s there was racism. You go back to the 20s, they're talking about. There's never an acknowledgement of in the present. Put simply, we no longer see a Britain where the system is deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. The impediments and disparities do exist. They are varied, and ironically, very few of them are directly to do with racism. Too often, racism, this is in quotation marks, is the catch all explanation and can be simply implicitly accepted rather than explicitly examined. The evidence shows that geography, family influence, socioeconomic background, culture, and religion have more significant impact on life chances than the existence of racism.
Let that sink in.
Now, now,
Whew,
so
hot take.
this whole report is a hot take.
It's a massive hot take.
The main framing of this report is divorcing race from basically these like your
Mhm.
day-to-day mundane concerns of geography, class, housing, health. You know what this is like? I was thinking about this. Your kid's getting bullied at school. You go to school and like my kid's getting bullied. And the head's just like, all right, I'm gonna look into it. But we need your kid to get over this sense of being victimized, but we'll look into it, we'll look into it. Then the head teacher comes back a week later and says, we found no evidence that your child's being bullied. Yes, they're being picked on in PE and in maths and in the playground and in the canteen and on the way to school. But you've got to see this for what they are. There is no systematic attempt to bully your child. It's
Mhm.
just incidental. And this is what the report was for
Wait, one
me.
more thing, and just to
Yeah,
kind of finish your analogy,
yeah.
and also, just before you leave, Mrs. Smith, is everything okay at home?
Fact. Yes. Yes, that's exactly what they would say.
Where's Mr. Smith, if I may ask? What?
What is bullying if it's not? Bullying isn't just a kid says something mean to your child, right? It's an envelope of harassment, of targeted discrimination. It's a systematic thing that happens day to day. You can't say this the child bullying your kid has no intention to bully your child.
But your child just happens to still being bullied. Your child is still coming home crying in tears,
Right.
clothes ripped, they've been tripped up, but they're not being, I mean, yeah, they're being bullied, but I don't know what to tell you, Mrs. Smith. There are no bullies in this school.
There were so I kind of two overall thoughts on this. The first is um so I was thinking like is this a whitewashed report? All puns intended and none where inappropriate. Yes and no. I think we must see this as a legitimate attempt by the commission to solve this problem. And this, I think, is insightful. It tells us how they really view the question of race, right? We should see this as a kind of a learning moment to see how those who don't care about progress actually see it and why they're so keen to deflect it away from racism and kind of split it into geography, race, housing. So, they're basically saying, yes, housing is bad, education is bad, all these other things are bad. There's no
Mhm.
attempt to do it. And the second thing, which is my kind of almost my main point, racism is always, always, always simplified to individual interactions.
Mm.
It's about hatred. As long as no one's doing something to you individually or
Yeah.
doing something to you out of hatred, that's not racism. I read an article that kind of said, let me pull it up quickly. It said, yeah, racism here appears to be understood as resulting from direct animus towards ethnic minorities, rather than it's an outcome, it's a set of consequences. If you've got poorer life chances at school, at work, housing, health, that is what we take racism to be. It's a
Mhm,
set of outcomes where, when seen in an aggregated way, paint a very clear picture. Just
mhm.
because there isn't somebody in NHS headquarters rubbing their hands like Mr. Burns, going, "Oh yes, I must kill the Negroes,"
Right.
does not mean racism is not happening. Just because
Yeah.
there's nobody at your local housing department, and I'm sure it happens, but let's just say there's nobody at these different bits of society rubbing their hands with glee about how they're going to disenfranchise black people. That does not mean racism does not exist. Racism does not rely on the hatred of individuals towards black people. It's a system that people within it don't even realize that they're part of it.
Yeah, I'll say this. It seems to me in this report, kind of piggybacking off what you're saying, where if no one is calling you the N word on the street, if your boss is not like Snape from Harry Potter on your neck every day, say calling you the N word, then it's not racism. The idea that racism has to be overt, it can't be organized. And what was really interesting about this report was this is at the same time, and once again, we talked about this in our vaccine hesitancy episode, where the the British Medical Association have a campaign to
Yeah,
look at racism at every level, recruitment of medical students in medical school, post medical school, training, junior doctors, all of that.
yeah,
And they've identified that there's racism at every step of the way. This is the BMA coming up and saying that months before this report. And even now, they've even said that post this report coming out and saying that actually, no, this is not true. And you're right. If it seems to me like unless the NHS commissioners are coming together with this globe like Trump and in Saudi Arabia
yeah,
and
yeah,
put
yeah,
their hands on this glowing globe and saying, we're going to destroy these black and brown communities. Absence of that,
yeah.
they cannot be racism cannot be systematic and institutional and organized. And to the point about geography,
Crazy.
if you're familiar with London, if you've ever lived in London or visited London or know enough about London, you know that London has these enclaves of particular ethnic communities. You know, East London is Pakistani, Bangladeshi. North London, Harrow sides, we're talking Sri Lankan, Indian, wealthy Indian communities. Go down south, Peckham, we're talking Caribbean communities. We're talking about West African communities, Brixton, African Caribbean communities. North in Edgware, we're talking Turkish, Kurdish.
Hmm.
Kensington, we're talking Arab communities. So let's look at geography. Like you want to look at geography, let's look at
Hmm.
geography. In the capital city, why do these enclaves exist?
Hmm.
Is it that these communities they just sort of go and the air just smells right? Or is it because historically, the Windrush generation, the post World War II generation, when they first came here and they settled on the worst of the land? And also, the one thing that the report said was that we shouldn't I think they wanted to do it with BAME as
Yeah,
an acronym, which stands for British Asian and Minority Ethnic Communities. But at the same time, which I think there's a lot of there's an interesting debate about people who don't like this term, and I've had many conversations with a few people, and I'm
yeah,
sort of on the fence. I think whatever, right? And I think the report did this time and time again. You cannot compare other minority ethnic communities to other minority ethnic communities as a way to say racism does not exist. The British Indian community are very different to the British Pakistani and Bangladeshi
yes,
communities,
yes. I
right?
noticed that.
The British Indian communities in the UK are wealthier. They
Yeah,
perform better. More kids from that community come from like double parent households.
yeah,
More kids from that community end up in medical school or Oxbridge or whatever. But these communities are different. And you pitting them Indian British community as sort of the what do they do that in America? Is it called the model minority? Actually does a disservice to both communities.
mm,
Right. And that's what I kept seeing was when there was a comparison about single parent household and saying, Caribbean and African and mixed had above average children from those communities living in single parent households. And then saying, well, but in India, in the Indian communities, like 6%, which is much lower than the national average. And it was sort of like, well, see, there you go, do what they do. But
yeah,
the British Indian community did not face the same racism and discrimination as the Windrush generation when they first came over here. They
yeah,
came over here from a lot of them from Uganda, from Kenya because of Idi Amin. And
Yeah.
also the families, first of all, the Indian communities that could afford to leave India and go to East Africa and make their fortunes there. And
Mm.
then I'm not saying it was a cruise holiday when they came over here. I'm not trying to erase their struggle. A lot of those communities came over here and lost everything back home, but they were far more educated
Yeah.
and better placed to adapt than the Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities that came directly from Pakistan and Bangladesh. And yes, there are cultural differences about how communities organize themselves,
Yeah.
how they maybe all live in the same household, how they build wealth. And yes, cultural differences exist, but culture does not exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You cannot sit here and tell me empire did nothing to these communities. How
Yeah.
India as a country versus the Caribbean and Africa, these hodgepodge of ethnicities forced to kind of come together, and then you wonder, well, I'm not really sure the culture's a bit off. Is essentially what I read from this report. That doesn't make sense, and that is not like you're saying. You want to see. I think you think it was an honest attempt to explain what's happening in the UK. I mean, you could convince me, but it was a really shoddy attempt.
Oh, I think there's no, first of all, there's a kind of distinct a lack of curiosity throughout the report.
Hmm.
And also, it just kind of lacks the kind of intellectual rigor. So let me address the 2 points, right? So the second one about the BME bit. So it says, it is demeaning to be categorized in relation to what we're not rather than what we are. British Indian, British Caribbean, and so on. The BAME acronym also disguises huge differences in outcomes between ethnic groups. It also allows our institutions and businesses to point to the successes of some BAME people in the organization and absolve them of responsibility for people from those minority groups that are doing less well. Okay, this makes sense. But then it also points to the kind of inherent contradiction throughout the report, which is on one hand, it's saying race is socially produced. But on the other hand, it takes these categories of race as fixed and natural. Because when it says it's demeaning to be categorized in relation to what we're not rather than what we are, it takes British Indian to be this fixed identity. It takes British Caribbean, British African to be fixed identities. And this is the problem that then plagues on the first point, which is when they say the increased risk of dying from COVID 19 is mainly due to an increased risk of exposure to infection. This is attributed to the fact that Black and South Asian people are more likely to live in urban areas with high population density and levels of deprivation, work in higher risk occupations such as healthcare or transport, and to live with older relatives who themselves are at higher risk due to their age or having other comorbidities such as diabetes and obesity. If you understand anything about structural racism, it is this, because the question we're asking is how does a race as a physical reality express itself in society? How is the question of race articulated? It's through things like education, employment, housing, health. By leaning back on this idea that race is this, because earlier they say, let's dismiss the idea of systematic racism because race is socially constructed. Okay.
Hmm.
And then later they dismiss this whole point. If race is socially constructed, how is it socially constructed? So the experience that racialized people have in society.
Based on what they look like.
What are the metrics? You have to at some point get to like to the nuts and bolts of it. If an alien arrived tomorrow who was in every sense colorblind, how would they be able to tell different races in London? What are the metrics they would use to differentiate different communities and different groups? It's the quality of their health, the quality of education, their access to housing, to the labor market, etc.
And that's linked to how they look, right?
Right.
And I think once again, it's this thing that's done time and time again that the British Indians have made it, the Chinese have made it. Why have you not made it? And once again, British Indians, British Chinese, Black communities, big umbrella here, look very different, but also have very different trajectories from when they started here. And the reason they have a very different trajectory is because of where they started. The starting points were very, very different. When the Windrush communities came over here, what did that look like?
Yeah.
What was their experiences like?
Right.
Where were they allowed to stay? Where were they not allowed to stay?
And
You
it's the
know?
failure to acknowledge this point, then the implicit conclusion of the report is there is something inherent about British Indians, there's something inherent about British Caribbeans
Yeah.
that results in where they are today.
Yes. And that's the family.
So let me read a quote on the family and then let's get your take on this. So The report argues that a certain groups have a culture of, and now here quote, family breakdown and a failure to integrate, which holds back their progress. The solution to this, the report then goes on to say, is the cultivation of a proud multicultural Britishness, which will encourage integration and stability. If you deny there's a historical context to why people are where they are, then you have to fall back. There's something inherent about them, which is basically the basis of racism, right? There's
Absolutely.
something there's something funny about those people. There's just something weird about those people. They just can't understand how to use knives and forks, right? You might as well have said that. Because our Central African friends and our South Asian friends still choose to eat with their hands, that is why they have worse outcome. That's basically what you're trying to say. What did you think about this family angle? Because the report then leans heavily on.
One, and this would be a really good segue for us to talk about who Tony Sewell is and his history and the things that he said,
Yeah.
because something. So when I was reading around this report, and we did read the report as well, was looking at who the commissioners were and what their background was and what their age was, and a lot of these people are older, right? So they're like 50s, like sort of 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
That's the era, right?
Yeah.
And we know there's a lot of people who are older from any race tend to be more conservative,
Hmm.
more religious. And this idea of a strong family being the smallest unit of a community is
Mm.
heavily emphasized.
Mm.
And I think, and I'm not saying that, the family is not important, let's all go our own way. I think the family is important, but let's look at what builds strong families. And what builds strong families isn't a culture,
Hmm.
it's an environment as well as a culture, but the
Yeah.
environment that this culture exists in is very important, right? Why are Black African, Black Caribbean, Black other, which I was confused as to who the other were? Who could be Black other? Anyway, and look at me saying Black people are monolith. Um, and also, I think mixed communities as well.
Yeah.
Who are these communities and what culture do they come from? But also, how was their culture received?
Right.
Because a family might mean something very different if you're from a community where your grandmother raised you and maybe your aunt raised you as opposed to your mum and your dad. Because even the idea of, and the report goes to some length to say, we're not vilifying single parents. We actually want to kind of have a conversation around that. But then does a whole pivot and does make a point to then say, well, why compare then a single parent household rates if it doesn't matter? Well,
Yeah.
clearly it does.
Mm.
But it's this idea of, and it's a very conservative traditionalist idea of a strong family, strong dad,
Yeah.
sort of weak slash strong mom,
Yeah.
kids following the dad. Have this idea of a strong leader. What have you done to the strong leaders of this community? What have you done to the men and the women of these communities? How are you ensuring that they can get jobs, they can get fairly treated in jobs, fairly remunerated for the work that they do? The NHS, when they fall ill, can they have a reasonable expectation of getting fair quality service?
Yeah.
So you have done everything to break down families of minorities and poor people, and then turn around and say to them, well, why are you people not sticking together? Where is the mental health support? Because I
Yeah.
guarantee you these are the same people when it comes to sexual health. They're not trying to hear it. You should only
Yeah.
have children within marriage. I
Yeah.
mean, look who your leader is, Boris. And I think you sent me some quotes on what Tony Sewell said about the family and things that he'd said about gay people in the
Yeah.
LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
This is not a man who looks at family in a holistic manner like most
Mm.
people do. Some people who wouldn't care if they were raised by their uncle and their aunt because they would still be their family, separate to they're not their dad or their mum. Someone who was cared for by their grandmother would look at that person as essentially a mother figure, right?
Yeah.
But once again, it's this cookie cutter idea of what a family looks like, and any aberration from that is the cause of all the ills of this community.
Yeah. And we almost come full circle to Lil Nas. So three things came to mind. So the first is the success of the Black community is in part because we've adapted to different types of families.
Hmm.
In as much as I think we can both agree that having two parents is probably better than one, and largely for kind of economic and also social reasons. Our ability to expand beyond the nuclear. Lots of people we know, raised by aunties and uncles and grandparents. That's been a strength, the ability to adapt. So Prince Philip passed away, I think, about 12 days ago and was buried on Saturday. And it got me thinking, do you know who else has a history of family breakdown?
The royal family
And they seem to be doing okay. In
and every
fact,
almost famous celebrity.
and we're this week we've been told, essentially we've been reminded the importance they play in our kind of national consciousness, and they're held up as almost like the first family.
They are, oh my gosh, they really are our first family.
They're our first family. Yet,
Dysfunctional.
how is it that they've been dysfunctional since way back? So this is not even about recent, whatever, tabloid stuff. Way back, you know, way back,
I mean, Henry, wasn't he the one who had six wives and killed,
right?
married, divorced, and all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff, right?
So it's not really about family breakdown. And the final thing that came to mind is the report is almost silent on Windrush.
Shockingly so, by the way.
It's just lack of curiosity. Here's a question anyone listening really doesn't understand why it's a more complex question than they might first realize. Start with this question. Why are black people in the UK today? How did we get here? What precipitated our arrival into the UK? There is a whole history there, almost of 100 years, longer if you're of Indian origin, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. And that history is mired in colonialism, which is racism. So we didn't come here with a clean slate. Or when we came here, the communities that we found here didn't view us with a kind of blank slate. It's not as if we were Norwegians turning up here or Swedes.
Mm,
For hundreds of years, they'd been fed this image of us as savages, as brutes, as natives, as people who their brave sons and occasionally daughters had been sent off to colonize, to civilize, to Christianize. And now
essentially, yeah.
but the report doesn't ask these questions. It doesn't care. It's just like one day everybody woke up and we were living in their communities and we just started grumbling and complaining about this thing called racism. And everybody was shocked. Shocked, I tell you, shocked. They were like, what? I've never called anybody the N word. What are they complaining about?
I mean, the bar is in the middle of the earth at this point. I want to comment on what you said about what's our origin story? Like,
Yeah.
why are they in these? Look at human history. These isles were for the most part, white. Why is there a burgeoning community of black and brown faces in this country? Has this report achieved what it set out to do, or is it just a clumsy attempt or an honest
Mhm.
attempt? And when Boris Johnson says we want to change the narrative, I think they were I think Tony Sewell really took that to heart and said, I'm going to change the narrative. And I want to read you this quote that this is the one that really inflamed everyone,
Right.
right? And essentially, it's a whole paragraph, but essentially, the report is here talking about the education that we teach children about Britain, British history. And essentially, the report is advocating for a new story, a new narrative to be told, right?
Yeah.
And I'll pick up the quote here. So, one great example, I guess, an example of what black and brown people have contributed to the culture is. So, one great example would be a dictionary or lexicon of well-known British words which are Indian in origin. Yay, Jim Carnes and Jodhpurs are Indian. Woo! That doesn't erase Amritsar. That doesn't erase the Bengal famine, right?
It really does not.
But thank you, India, for Jodhpur. Anyway, there is a new story about the Caribbean experience which speaks to the slave
Yeah.
period, not only being about profit and suffering, but how culturally African people transformed themselves into remodeled African slash British, which I suppose maybe remodeled British. I don't know
I don't know
what I
how
was
that
meant to
sentence
say.
ended. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, okay. So here's the thing. Why was there a need to remodel yourself? Is that because you found yourself in a new continent
Mm.
with hostile people, enslaved, forced to work yourself to death, forced to see your children sold, forced to have children or to father children and look after children that were not yours? And then from those embers of your human dignity, those literal rags, you had to then pick up, cobble together a new culture and slowly water it and grow into this culture that is now almost in every continent. Every country has a hip hop and rap scene, but no one wants to sit here and talk about where it came from. Rock and roll, soul, all these music, soul food. Where did that come from? A lot of Caribbean food, cuisine, culture is a hodgepodge of Asian, Black, indigenous people cobbled together. These are broken people, broken by whom no one bothers to ask. It's a culture that is, yes, it is beautiful and it is something to remark upon, but we cannot not tell the full story of why this
Yeah.
culture had to exist,
Yeah.
why this culture had no sorry had to be made, and why it exists as it exists today.
Yeah.
And it's this attempt to whitewash and say, yes, forget the slavery part. Yes, we were selling you and your people for money. You guys made reggae. You guys made hip hop. You guys made all these fun music stuff that we poorly dance to. So what are you complaining about? And I think the report has made a sincere attempt to do what it was set out to do, which is to create a new narrative. And unfortunately, that narrative is not based in fact. I mean, there's been such backlash from this report, from the British Medical
Yeah.
Association, from the unions, from historians. I mean, there were a couple of people who was found out they were stakeholders, even though they had nothing to do with this report. There was a resignation of was he number 10's, what was his official title?
Advisor on race.
Yeah, he resigned, and they said, well, it wasn't about the report, but ostensibly it is about the report. But essentially, they are pissing on us, if I can say that, and telling us this panic Fanta that's raining down on us. Not even, you know, like it's such a bold faced lie, as if we don't have Google at our fingertips, as if we can't Google for ourselves what all of this is.
Yeah, and that's what I meant. That if we see it as simply as an attempt to whitewash, there is an audience with whom this report landed amazingly well,
Oh
and
yeah,
that was kind of the
absolutely.
point of the thing. Um, and also, when you were saying about because the PM had said he wanted to change the narrative, it just got me thinking of will no one read me of this turbulent priest? It's like
Yeah.
I think what you said was really important. That the generations before us, they can look around today and see progress, but our generation, we're not benchmarking against a time we were not around.
And we
I'm
shouldn't
not
have to.
right. And so that's why this was an opportunity to kind of talk to the future. And it just was about, it felt like banking some of the gains of the past. So if you're speaking to a 60-year-old, 70-year-old and saying, yes,
They
in
love
the
it.
50s, 60s, 70s,
Mm.
you faced all these awful conditions. And look, I'm thankful a lot of those don't exist. It's about the bar. Where was the bar to begin with?
So
That
low.
we as society have cleared a very low bar isn't the point. There are higher bars that we should hold ourselves to.
Which is total absolute equality. I mean, you yes, I saw this report clap what's the term? Clap itself on the back. I saw this report clap itself on the back about, well, there's only 2.3% difference. Yes, but let's contextualize that,
Yeah,
right? Yes, compared to maybe 50%. Yes, that's amazing. But if the goal is never true, complete total equality, that's a problem.
yeah,
And I also found, I mean, maybe this is not to the point of this report, but I found the report quite callous when it said there were parts of some ethnic minority communities, and often this is British Chinese, British Indian, had done better than their white counterparts.
hmm,
That's a problem. That's a problem. And that speaks to a very specific issue in that community. And if you genuinely care about racial equality, that does include gypsies, Irish travelers, all these marginalized white communities on the border of what whiteness means in the UK in this present age, right? And that's why maybe the BAME as an acronym doesn't really stand, and maybe it's not useful. But if we're going to sit here and compare and essentially have grievance Olympics, which we're told we should never have, it's
mm,
never going to work, because for me, this report, there were some really good recommendations around the NHS and health disparities, and some of the recommendations do make sense, but I wonder whether any of it's ever going to be achieved if
yeah,
it's all fruit from the poison tree. If you cannot
100%.
agree that institutional and systematic racism exists, When you recommend NHS should do more for Black mothers, why can't the NHS turn around and say, well, that's just a by and by? That's just people falling through the cracks.
It's a coincidence. It's
Right.
an incidental. I think that's an amazing point, and we needed the report to facilitate a healthy grown up discussion, and then that discussion creates the environment where you can then look at the recommendations.
Mhm.
I haven't talked about the recommendations because I think they're meaningless without this broader context. The
Exactly.
attempt to
Agree.
divorce race from this political, social, economic context and historical context means we'll never really address the problem. So you've got 24, I think, is it 24 recommendations? Yes, they're great, but we've had recommendations in the past. I think it was interesting to note, maybe in conclusion, that number 10 has kind of distanced itself from it. We'll see where that goes. Anything else you wanted to say before we turn to
Our last segment.
our last segment?
Am I disappointed? No, because when I saw who the commissioners were, but I no, I think we've covered most of what we wanted to talk about. Are you disappointed? Are you surprised? Are you shocked? No, because when the Lammy report came out, that was well received, backed up. I mean, David Lammy's he's not one little schoolboy down the road, and his report was hefty.
Yeah,
Nothing happened.
yeah, yeah.
Nothing substantial happened off that. I
Mm.
don't see, and I think to the point that you said, is this report going to really project and really be the springboard for actual change when it can't even agree on the reasons behind the disparities? No, it's not going to be. And I think it's incumbent on what we've seen is individual institutions to just go ahead and do what they think is right. When the British Medical Association has commissioned work to look at healthcare disparities, when the NHS has done that, when the universities have done that, separate to the government, that's the kind of change that we can hopefully rely on. Maybe we can help push in however capacity that we can. But we're not going to get leadership from this government when it comes to racial disparities and racial inequality. And we shouldn't expect it. And we would be naive to do so.
Right. Before we turn off the lights and leave the salon, barbershop's in the back.
Yeah.
Our popular by demand, something on my spirit. Have you got something on your spirit you want to bring to the front of the congregation and lay out on the altar?
As everyone does that humming sound at the back. People have just been annoying me lately. I have a lot on my spirit, but you said the date today, which is the 21st of March, right? So yesterday is, which really should be an international holiday, was 420, as put in the American stylings of how they organize it, which is month and then day. Ridiculous, but this is the one time I can agree on this. Yeah, so yesterday was 420, which is the day that we celebrate the holy herb. And yet we still have not legalized the plant. It is just a plant. Shout out to Rathman, RIP. Never forgotten, forever in our heart.
Yeah,
And I was so annoyed that I did not have the choice to participate.
yeah,
All I want is choice, right? Capitalism is all about consumer choice. I'm a consumer. I want choice. And is it every year? I know maybe lockdown has changed. No, actually, London's not in lockdown. Did the masses go to Hyde Park and congregate?
I know, I know,
Did
I know
you?
they did last year. I don't know if they did this year.
Well, fight the good fight on, my brothers and sisters, because if I could be with you, I would.
I know we're saying in jest, but drug policy is ridiculous.
Your boy Keir Starmer came out and said he's not for it.
Man, seriously, I don't understand.
I think he's the plant. I think he's the Manchurian candidate. I'm gonna come out and say it. Listen, let it be known. I said this. He's a Manchurian candidate.
Did you see what happened to him in that pub?
Yeah. See, when I saw the video, I thought it was a conservative. It was a lifelong Labour member, apparently.
Hey, I listen. If you can't come out and just what are you scared of? Who are you scared of pissing off? Who are you? Which votes are you trying to collect?
I don't know.
I don't understand.
Because conservatives are never going to vote for you. No matter how conservative you get, no matter how blue the lake, even if you turn purple, they're never going to, even the darkest of purple, the darkest of indigos, to the point where from afar we're not even sure if you're red or blue. They're never going to vote for you. So stop pandering and start actually speaking to your caucus. Speak to your people.
I mean, yeah, look, we need to have another look at drug pot because it's ridiculous. Alcohol is more dangerous than cannabis.
Hmm.
Yet for some reason we're okay with alcohol but not cannabis. The Labour Party needs to sort itself out. If the Progressive Party in this country cannot bring itself to support a sensible drug policy, what are you here for? I don't understand.
And apparently, the UK is the biggest exporter of, or is it medical cannabis or just cannabis?
I think medical cannabis.
Wait, so you're growing it with my water, my soil, and I can't even smell the fragrance.
And you know what? I think it's going to be the Conservatives who legalize it because the Conservatives are great at timing for lots of things. Which so when you look at, say, for
Gay
example,
marriage.
right, equal marriage, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
14 years of a Labour government, you couldn't achieve that, even though you had this stonking majority in 97 and this decent majority 21. No, but you wanted to use majority to go kill people in the Middle East. I
Shame.
just
Shame.
do you know what? I will be forever heated at the Iraq War
Oh, sorry.
because you had a massive majority, you had the country on your side, you had the press on your side. You could have done so much good.
Literally.
I will forever be angry about the Iraq War.
Hmm. Hmm. And now we're paying for the price of it, literally and figuratively.
Whatever Tony Blair says, ISIS, that's on you.
And the fact that he's still here talking, go sit in a corner and be quiet. God, be quiet. Sit there. Shh.
Tony Blair came out yesterday against the football thing. Then
Why?
he came out
Yes.
today and he said the government should publish. Sit yourself down. I have no interest to hear what. Why are you
Nothing.
still out here?
Shameless. Do what Gordon is doing. Do what Gordon is doing. Do what David Miliband, do what he's doing. He's saving the kids. He does such good work with the International Council for Refugees. I think it's called, is it called the ICR? Anyway, he's doing good work. Do what he's doing. Or no, every couple of months he's colluding with the Saudis. He's in Qatar. Stop it. We don't do your dirty work in silence.
You know what? Ex prime ministers just like we're going to talk about David Cameron.
This could really devolve into a whole other episode because and all we just started with was we just want to have the choice to consume the herb. It's a vegetable, it's a plant, it's natural.
Keir Starmer, if you want to get your chance to be an annoying ex prime minister, then you just sort your act out. And that brings us to the end of our seventh episode. We have been the Unpicking podcast. I'm Kay, and my co-host is S. Join us in a couple of weeks' time, where we will tackle the biggest story of the day, but also tell you what's going on in the world of culture.
Oh yeah, and before we go, just one last thing for people. I just want to remind you that jet fuel does not melt steel beams. Keep your third eye open. I said what I said.